Greetings once again. James Sackley, author of the best-selling book, Body, Mind, and Spirit, The Awakening, and welcome to yet another installment of the Body, Mind, and Spirit Bible Study Series. Over the past couple of months, we've been doing a lot of studies when it comes to the various miracles of Christ. And occasionally we would diverge off the path and talk about some other things like the Psalms. And today we're going to talk about basically two of my favorite subjects to talk about, and that's the Bible and sex. In particular, what does the Bible say about sex and lust? Now, I can post a million scriptures up, and they all basically say the same thing. You know, we shouldn't engage in sex outside of marriage. But the number one scripture that I think that all the other scriptures in the Bible point to comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, and it says that flee from fornication, or some translations may say from sexual impurities. The Greek word is porneia, but flee from fornication. Every sin that a man commits is outside of his body, but he who commits fornication sins against his own body. That's a very, very powerful thing, and we'll break that down. Even though we're not breaking down multiple verses like we typically do, that one verse, 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 18, we're going to dissect that, and we're really going to break that down about fornication, about lust, and all of that stuff. What does the Bible say? Now, first of all, you know, whenever you're looking to say what the Bible says about something, you have to define it so we're clear about exactly that we're talking about the same thing. So we're going to talk about sex. We're going to talk about fornication. What is fornication? And fornication, from a biblical sense, it has two definitions. As a broad definition is fornication is sex outside of marriage. If you're not married, you're fornicating. But a narrow definition of fornication is going to be, as I said, the Greek word porneia is going to be sexual immorality. So that includes homosexuality is viewed as sexual immorality. Even anal sex is viewed as sexual immorality. Oral sex, all of those things, that's within the narrow confines of sexual immorality. But we're going to reserve talking about that. Some of you guys who listen to this right now, like, what? Oral sex is sexual immorality? Anal sex? No, don't worry. We'll talk about that later. But just to give you an idea of fornication, broad sense, it's going to be any sex outside of marriage. Narrow sense, those things that I've defined. And what is lust? Lust, the generic definition of lust is going to be a strong desire towards something. Sexual lust is going to be a strong desire towards sex. And it doesn't necessarily have to be your mate, your spouse. And I guess that's where the sin, that's where the problem comes into play. When you're having strong desires, sexual desires, and that person isn't your mate. So what does the Bible say about that? And I guess first we have to look at the purpose of sex. When God created Adam, and then he knew that man was lonely, so he put Adam in a deep sleep, and then from his side, Eve evolved. He put them together, not just to, be fruitful and multiply, not just to have Cain and Abel and populate the earth. The reason why they came together and the reason why they started introducing sex to that union is because they were two spirits. And, I point out in my book in the section Soul versus Spirit that we are, our very essence, we are spirits. We live in a body. And we have a soul. The soul is the mind and all of that stuff. But we are spirits. And long after this body returns to the dust and earth from whence it came, our spirits will go on forever. So when we have sex, basically, that's the way that two spirits become one. There's no other way to do it. You can talk to someone and you can philosophize with them. You can use big words and you can do all kinds of things. But there's no way for two people to become one other than the institution of sex. And that's what God intended sex to be, a union, if you will, a coming together of two spirits, so that those two souls, those two bodies, those two life forms will become one. And they do that through the union of sex. More importantly than that, just two people becoming one, sex is also meant as a covenant. A covenant is an agreement. As a matter of fact, the Old Testament, some people may refer to it as the Old Covenant, New Testament, a new covenant. But marriage and sex, it is a covenant. And as a matter of fact, in the Bible, the most sacred of all covenants is a blood covenant. And that goes back to the shedding of blood. Now you look at sex, When one virgin comes together with her husband, there's going to be, unless she's very athletic, there's going to be the hymen there, and there's going to be some blood involved typically with the first sexual encounter. That's a blood covenant. And every time man and woman comes together, or husband and wife comes together, they are renewing that covenant. So this is what happens. Once we start to play house and do this stuff outside of marriage, we begin to mess up God's complete order. Case in point, you get up together, you hook up, you fool around, you have a fling, one night stand, whatever you want to call it. And that's just some banging sex. The relationship really doesn't go anywhere. It's just sex. And what happens is that sexual partner will stay with you, or more importantly, will probably haunt you the rest of your life, because you'll look back on it and you'll compare all your other lovers against that one lover, because they totally rock your world. Now, just imagine you find later in life, you get married and you have a husband, you have a wife, but you're still looking back to that person that used to rock your world. And unfairly, you're judging your spouse because they didn't rock your world like the other person. That's one of the basic rudimentary ways, but it goes deeper than that, because we are two spirits. And every time we basically have that covenant, have that communion, if you will, with another spirit, we get a piece of them. A piece of them resides with us forever and ever. And here's a deep fact, something you never maybe even thought about before. Every time we put something into our body, it changes our body. When we eat, basically the food is broken down into glucose. That glucose gets pushed into our cells. When we drink, we get the moisture out, and it helps hydrate our organs and hydrate the cells as well. When we get injections, those are meant to help alleviate any maladies we may have. So every time we put something in our body, it's changing our body. And the same is true with sex. Men, when you enter a woman, you change her body. Men, you may not think about it because, you go around just swinging, you don't necessarily care. But women are extra sensitive to that and the nurturing roles. And whenever someone enters them, they are actually sensitive, and they're changed because something is entering them. And that's the way it's meant to be. Anytime anything enters our body, it changes who we are. So just imagine if you had a bunch of different lovers. Each lover basically left a part of them with you. And guys, we're the same as well. If we're going out, we may think we're practicing safe sex by strapping up condoms, but there is no thing when it comes to safe sex when it comes to an exchange of spirits, basically, because we're mocking that thing that God put into play that was just meant for a man and woman to come together and to bond. That's why we're haunted by past lovers, we're haunted by past relationships, and God forbid if we've had some drama in those relationships as well. We carry all of that old baggage into the new relationship. So that's some insight about sex, what the Bible intended for sex to be. But let's look at another situation. You may say, okay, James, yeah, you got a point there. Some of that stuff I never really thought about before. So, I'm in a committed relationship with my wife, and I'm not going to be, getting up with anyone else. But I have some thoughts about her. I got this other chick that I used to work with, or this someone's on my job, or worse yet, this lady in my church. She comes to church every Sunday. She's just banging. Just I'm having thoughts about it. Ain't nothing wrong with it. I'm not hurting anyone. But as we know in the scriptures, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. And the Bible speaks against the lusting as well. Because what happens is, once we begin to entertain those thoughts and desires, two things will typically happen. Number one, we either begin to act on those things with the person we're lusting after, or number two, we begin to take our attentions away from our spouse. They should be our spouse, our husband, or our wife should be the sole focus of all of our sexual desires. But once we begin to lust after someone else, we unknowingly, sometimes knowingly, take our attentions from them as well. As a matter of fact, speaking of, Sister so-and-so, Sister Brickhouse, let's just call her Sister Brickhouse. Sister Brickhouse comes to church every Sunday, and she just distracts you. That's one of the reasons why I enjoy it. I really do. We have a lot to learn from our Muslim neighbors and our Muslim brothers, because I go to occasionally Jummah, that's the Friday communal prayer in a Muslim mosque. And there, it's segregated. Christians hate on it because, hey, we got men sit up the front, women sit in the back. And that's great. It really is a great thing, because there are no distractions. You're there just to worship. And I wish in a Christian church we had some way to kind of segregate the worship as well. We have our private schools. Men have their boys classes, girls have girls classes, because there are no distractions. And it would be a great thing if we can somehow start to introduce that into Christian church as well, because I'm telling you, because there are no dress codes when it comes to church, a lot of ladies come to church like they're going to the club. Unfortunately, a lot of folks come to church, like they want to trap a man, and they're making sure that all the men see the bait that they're using to set that trap as well. But those things are distractions, and those things lead to lustful thoughts. So just because you're thinking it in your mind, just because you're thinking you're not hurting anyone, it is, because you're lusting, and Christ even speaks of it. Once you begin to lust after someone in your mind, basically you've already committed adultery in your heart. So lusting, it's not a victimless crime. But let's go one step further. Someone may say, hey, I'm in a committed relationship. I never think of cheating on my wife. But what about masturbation? Is masturbation a sin? We're going to get very deep right now. Masturbation, is it a sin? It could be, and it couldn't be. This is when masturbation is a sin. And what is a sin? Sin is basically something that's not in the purpose of God. When we basically, as I said in earlier telecast, sin comes from a Greek word in archery, a Greek term in archery, when you miss the mark. So is masturbation, is that missing the mark? If your masturbatory thoughts and fantasies is your spouse, and they know about it, that you like to wang chung when you're thinking of them, then that's between you two. I don't see how that could be a sin. She's the object of your thoughts. You getting busy with it, God bless you. However, if your masturbatory fantasies are brought upon by watching pornography, if your desires and lusts are in someone else other than your mate, then that becomes a problem as well. Now, some of the old school Christians use the story of Onan. Onan comes out of Genesis chapter 38, chapter 38, verse 9, I do believe, when Onan spilled his seed. And they said, hey, he spilled his seed. God killed that man for masturbating. And that's not at all what it's about. Onan, if you may get the story in context, Onan spilled his seed on the ground because he did not want to father his brother's children. That was the custom at the time, that if you had a deceased brother, the next of kin would have to go into his wife so that the wife would have kids or someone around to carry on the family name and also protect her. Onan didn't want to do that. He wanted to basically turn his back on his family obligation. So that's why he was smited by the Lord, not because he masturbated. But I hope you get some insight there that masturbation, is it a sin? No, it's not a sin. If you're thinking about your wife or you're thinking about your husband and they know that that's what you like to do, then I'm like, do you. But if you're stealing away, if you're doing things, and if the object of your sexual desires is anyone other than your spouse, then that is indeed a sin. And just like folks become addicted to sex, a lot of folks can become addicted to masturbation or pornography as well. There's a big movement out there called Every Man's Battle. Men that are addicted to pornography or masturbation or sexual things as well, because sex, it's a powerful thing, be it, sex between two people or sex with yourself in asexual sex. It's a powerful thing because once you release, it sets off the endorphins, and those endorphins are the same things that we get from a high when you're using cocaine. It's a very powerful thing. So as a recap, we'll look at this thing. Sex in the Bible is meant between, very simply, one man, one woman. And you may challenge me on that. You say, hey, James, there were some cats in the Bible that had a bunch of wives. So how can you say it's just one man, one woman? And I always get hit with this. Some people say, hey, Solomon had 700 wives and 300 concubines. Yes, he did, but he went against the will of God. God told Solomon that you should not amass horses and you shouldn't multiply your wives. And exactly what happened, Solomon went out. He got too big for his britches. He went out and got 700 wives, 3 concubines, and all of the other wives had other gods. And those gods took him away from the one God. So Solomon paid a price for his disobedience, for those multiple wives and concubines. And as a matter of fact, when Nebuchadnezzar came in and sacked Jerusalem, that was Solomon's temple, the first temple that was destroyed. And once Solomon became obedient, that led to the decline of his dynasty, the unraveling of Israel as well for his disobedience, marrying multiple wives and just thinking he was wiser than God, so to speak. So basically, as a recap, once again, sex is meant to be between one man, one married man, one married woman. Don't bring other people into your business. You may say, hey, I'm a married man, I'm a married woman, but we like to swing or we like to do threesomes. If you do that, then that person who's not married, then they bring something also into the relationship. And you may think that it's fun, you may think it's just sex, but that could really complicate the relationship as well. God knew what he was doing by limiting sex to one married man and one married woman, because in that relationship, those two individuals have invested in each other. And when we do that, renew that blood covenant, each time we have sexual relationships, we're telling that person is that I'm wholeheartedly for you and you're wholeheartedly for me. That's the basically the offering that we're giving up to our partners. But when we bring other people into those relationships, we kind of take away from that as well. Masturbation, as a recap, as long as you're thinking about your partner when you're wang chunging, do you. Lust, any sexual desires other than your partner, that is indeed a sin. So once again, as always, I encourage you to leave your thoughts here about sex in the Bible and masturbation and lust and all of that good stuff as well. I will post that scripture that I referenced, 1 Corinthians 6:18 up there. But I'm curious in your thoughts that you may have. And as always, if you have any other subjects you'd like me to cover in this Bible study, please drop me an email at info@jameshackley.com. And also, I invite you to visit my website, www.jameshackley.com. Get your copy of this life-changing book, Body, Mind, and Spirit, The Awakening. And until next time, God bless.